He was expecting something more fun and erotic. No. Better than food, man. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clive Lee Sargent. Great to see you as always. Hope you're doing well. Get that coffee. All right. Delicious. Please let me know what your favorite Halloween book is in the comments below. Thanks a bunch. All right, to celebrate the return of October, today we've got The Hellbound Heart by the English author Clive Barker, published in 1986. You like how this matches my shirt? My wife got me this shirt. She's so awesome. Thanks, son. This was his first novel and, of course, was the basis for the film adaptation Hellraiser in 1987. Also directed by Barker, and very impressively, I might add, for a first-time director. It's the only one of his books I've read, and I've been wanting to read this one for a long time. You know, I grew up watching Hellraiser, and I thought it was great. A really impressive demonstration of what can be done with not very much money, because it was only $1 million, which, you know, of course was more at the time, but, I mean, that's really not much money for a film. And, I mean, just the soundtrack and the visuals and everything, the makeup, you know, it's really... We just watched it the other night, and it really holds up. I've also seen the film Nightbreed, which was based off of Barker's novel Cabal. Did he direct that one too? Nightbreed. Yes, he did. Okay, yeah. All right. Man. Oh, that was scored by Danny Elfman. Great campy 80s film featuring the director David Cronenberg as a masked psychiatrist psycho, Dr. Decker. He's like this, you know, mild-mannered Canadian psychiatrist, and he's an absolute psychopath who knifes people wearing this totally creepy mask that kind of looks like a scarecrow with 2 buttons for eyes. This is a short, Poe-like romantic and necromantic horror novella about the murderous deeds of a woman trying to raise her lover back from the dead, as he's stuck between 2 worlds, kind of, after escaping a hell that he willingly placed himself in. He kind of asked for it. While it's a straight traditional horror story in its form, has a very traditional narrative structure, it's very much traditional horror writing, in a way, it possesses something unusual, right? Which clearly distinguished Barker far from the traditional milieu. Clive Barker infuses his narrative with a kind of alchemy of the anatomical, right? The painful descriptions of the transformation of solid flesh into tortured residue, and vice versa. The vampiric metamorphosis of a withered, ruined corpse into a newly born human being, strengthened, of course, by, what else? Blood. Much of the imagery is concerned with the physical, right? The material of the body. Blood, bone, flesh, muscle, nerves, the fluids of the body. The corporeal materialism that defines us as creatures able to seek for these things to be pushed to the limits, to the point of destruction, in search of a transcendent, transgressive pleasure. A kind of body horror. Very much of the Cronenberg variety. You know, these guys were sort of, they were really similar, actually. Barker seems to have been inspired by the connection between eroticism and death made by Georges Bataille. There are a few books I can think of that more explicitly connect the two than this and Story of the Eye. There's Eroticism, of course, which was Bataille's philosophical work, which came long after Story of the Eye, but that's not fiction. And Sade, of course. The novella resembles a ghost story written by the Marquis de Sade. What makes it even more compelling is that this book launched Barker to the heights of success. I mean, you couldn't be more successful with like one book. This is a 164-page novella, and the series, the Hellraiser franchise, is still strong today. They just did another adaptation, I think. I mean, it's like the sequels and the offshoots of that series are enormous. I mean, so he really did tap into something, something kind of latent in the culture's dark, shadowy thoughts. You know, I don't know what you want to call it. The subconscious, the Freudian unconscious of Western culture. It's a huge success. I mean, I've only seen the first 2. I saw Hellraiser 2, and I was like, meh, you know, like, it was okay. I mean, it starts, you know, after the first one, it just really kind of like just deteriorates, no pun intended, into kind of just a gore, you know, traditional horror films. But the first one just is like, wow, this is fucked up. We'll tear your soul apart. The first film is the only one I care for, personally. We rewatched it the other day. Still holds up. There is a terrific interview with Barker on YouTube. Pure steers, black tank top, smoking a cigar, looking like he just walked off the set of Cruising. It's fantastic. Barker himself was gay. Rates himself as a 6 out of 10, I'm assuming, on the S&M scale. You know, pretty much what I figured. So the Hellbound Heart starts with a man and a puzzle box. The box is referred to as Le Marchand's configuration, named after the creator. So it's actually a puzzle box, but when you solve it, it's incredibly complicated, and it takes forever to get anywhere with it. But when you start to solve it, then music starts to play. It's also a music box, right? Then things happen, and more music is increasingly added, and then all of a sudden you've called Pinhead, right? It's a problem. The puzzle box is infamous as it holds the key to summoning a group of entities referred to as the Cenobites, led by one called the Engineer, who doesn't take on a form. But the Cenobites are kind of disfigured demons, like disfigured from cuts and hooks and gashes, right? They're referred to as the Order of the Gash. They exist in this alternate dimension to push the boundaries of all sensation, of pain and pleasure, and fusing them. It seems like they live to push any boundaries previously thought to exist. In a sexual way, yes, but also in a way of unimaginable suffering, as the antagonist of this book discovers, much to his disappointment. He was expecting something more fun and erotic. No. So yeah, the story begins with Frank Cotton, the story's antagonist, who has managed to obtain the box from a man named Kircher, whom he bought it from, and has come back to England, squatting in the house of his deceased grandmother, patiently trying to figure out the puzzle box which summons those known as the Order of the Gash. The whole thing is this sexual horror show. It's kind of like concerned with the horrors of the body and lust and depravity and pushing the limits and pain and pleasure and the mixture of the two, the fusion of the two, and sadomasochism. Yeah, leather, chains, hooks, bondage, you get it. Barker notes that they've been written about in the diaries of two men who historically did exist. First, Roger Bolingbroke, a man who was hanged, drawn, and quartered after having been convicted of treasonable witchcraft against King Henry VI, who appears in Shakespeare's book of the same name in Part 2. And the second diary belonged to the infamous French serial killer Gilles de Rais, who actually fought along with Joan of Arc, and after she was burned, became obsessed with the occult and began murdering children. Like with Elizabeth Bathory, you know, kind of the same, seemed to be kind of cut from the same cloth. Bataille actually wrote a whole book on his trial, which I have yet to read. So Frank is kind of a pleasure addict, a kind of sadistic sybarite who has traveled all over in search of increasingly powerful pleasures. A professional dragon chaser, ultimately to no avail, to no satisfaction, right? Because that's how that goes. The book starts with him in the attic where he's performing a ritual, you know, concentrating on solving the box in order to call the Cenobites. Very unfortunately for him, he does. What comes for him arrives, and then Frank is no longer of this world. Rory Cotton, Frank's brother, arrives not long after the seance to move into the house with his wife Julia, who, unbeknownst to him, had a one-time affair with his brother Frank shortly before their wedding. Julia has grown increasingly disinterested in Rory and discovers in the attic the discarded possessions of Frank, suggesting that he was there not too long ago. So the house is old and needs some TLC. After Rory cuts himself while working on the house, he steps into the attic where Julia is recalling the memory of her violent but passionate encounter with his brother. And while bleeding all over the floor, Rory asks for her help. Later, we discover the blood has disappeared, because it has been sucked up by the floor and room in the house, which has seemingly been cursed, and is now designated as a sort of hideous womb, because a wretched fragment of a being emerges from this blood. In a very gross way in the film, I might add, although very impressive with the special effects, all practical. Those are the days. Yeah, terrific scene. Nightmarishly memorable. Really, it's just a collection of human organic tissue and refuse, but even in its fragile state, it's able to address Julia in the dark when it comes upon her. And the four words it says to her are, Julia, it's Frank, blood. Julia interprets this correctly, of course. A severely depleted humanoid manifestation of Frank Cotton has returned and been resurrected, and requires nourishment in the form of human blood to restore his vitality, so they can be together again, happily ever after. Of course. Talk about a one-night stand, huh? I've been cutting for 3 months for a fitness challenge. I'm absolutely fucking exhausted. My hormones are in the trash. My calories are in the garbage. So I can really identify right now with Frank's withered corpse as it desperately dreams of nutritional substance. So driven by her infatuation with Frank, Julia turns to murdering Johns for their sanguinary value. Rory, suspicious of his wife's new behavior, you know, killing men and draining their blood and all that, asks his friend Kirsty to stop by and speak with her. Julia can't stand Kirsty. In the film, Kirsty is actually Rory's daughter, and Julia's the stepmother. And that makes a lot more sense, I think, from a narrative perspective. This is kind of a strange, she's just a friend in the book, but that doesn't, I mean, it's much stronger in the film, that part. Kirsty thus stumbles into this whole strange nightmare and discovers everything. The Hellbound Heart is a strange Lovecraftian Bataille novella that is unlike anything else I've come across. It reminded me of J.G. Ballard's Crash, one of my favorites. The pornographic, almost medical lexicon of sexual and traumatic violence involving metal and glass fused with flesh is right in line with Barker's dark vision. I was surprised at how well written this was. Barker has a terrific balance of accessible horror writing, vocabulary, creativity, and brevity in his prose. It's a very readable book. It'll probably take many of you an afternoon or two, maybe a weekend, and would be a perfect way to enter the season of the witch. Check this out. This is near the beginning. I thought this was just great. Frank's able to buy it from a man named Kircher. When he's smuggling heroin in Dusseldorf, Germany, he hears about the box and he follows a trail, and he finds this guy named Kircher who sells it to him. Or he's German, so I guess it would be, how would it be pronounced? Kircher, maybe. How had he first heard about Le Marchand's box? He couldn't remember. In a bar, maybe, or a gutter, from the lips of a fellow derelict. At the time, it was merely a rumor. This dream of a pleasure dome where those who had exhausted the trivial delights of the human condition might discover a fresh definition of joy. And the route to this paradise? There were several, he was told, charts of the interface between the real and the realer still, made by travelers whose bones had long since gone to dust. One such chart was in the vaults of the Vatican, hidden in code in a theological work unread since the Reformation. Another, in the form of an origami exercise, was reported to have been in the possession of the Marquis de Sade, who used it, while imprisoned in the Bastille, to barter with the guard for paper on which to write the 120 Days of Sodom. Yet another was made by a craftsman, a maker of singing birds called Le Marchand, in the form of a musical box of such elaborate design a man might toy with it for half a lifetime and never get inside. Stories. Stories. Yet since he had come to believe in nothing at all, it was not so difficult to put the tyranny of verifiable truth out of his head, and it passed the time, musing drunkenly on such fantasies. It's great. It's terrific. It's very nicely written. I can't believe I waited until now to read this. So this is when he summons them, in the beginning. And then, light. It came from them, from the quartet of Cenobites who now, with the walls sealed behind them, occupied the room. A fitful phosphorescence, like the glow of deep-sea fishes, blue, cold, charmless. It struck Frank that he had never once wondered what they would look like. His imagination, though fertile when it came to trickery and theft, was impoverished in other regards. The skill to picture these eminences was beyond him, so he had not even tried. Why then was he so distressed to set eyes upon them? Was it the scars that covered every inch of their bodies, the flesh cosmetically punctured and sliced and infibulated, then dusted down with ash? Was it the smell of vanilla they brought with them, the sweetness of which did little to disguise the stench beneath? Or was it that as the light grew, and he scanned them more closely, he saw nothing of joy, or even humanity in their maimed faces, only desperation, and an appetite that made his bowels ache to be voided? Wow. But well written, no? I mean, it's actually one of the best written books of the year that I've read. There's definitely a fantastical quality to it. Vanilla, that's such a weird thing to put in there. It's like, but it kind of makes sense. Leather and vanilla, I don't know, it's weird. Clive Barker's about details, right? He's got unique details. I think you'll enjoy it if you're a fan of the writings of Angela Carter. Certainly if you're a fan of the whole body horror genre and David Cronenberg as well. And David Cronenberg directed the adaptation of Crash. Ah, all these people know each other. Yes, they do. They always do. The background of this book is fascinating. Clive Barker was a hustler in the 70s, so I was totally on point with the whole cruising thing which I wrote before I researched this. Thanks, Wikipedia. He was a sex worker. That's why he was able to write so convincingly about Julia, who seduces men for Frank's physical renewal. Apparently Pinhead, the character, the Cenobite, who everybody knows, he's on the cover of all the films, was inspired by an S&M club in New York in the 70s, the mid-70s, called Cell Block 28, where Barker saw people getting pierced for fun, like play piercing. Just take my word for it, don't go down that rabbit hole. Also, the legendary experimental industrial band Coil were originally commissioned to do the soundtrack for Hellraiser, but I think the producers pushed for a different composer, or the producer. Thus, their soundtrack was shelved, but it was eventually put out to be listened to, and I've linked to it below. It's kind of goofy. I haven't listened to the whole thing, but it's kind of goofy. Coil, for me, has always been kind of goofy. Like, Throbbing Gristle and Coil never were really my thing. Like, I loved Throbbing Gristle's performance of Discipline in San Francisco, but like other than that, I never really cared for their stuff or Coils. I could never really quite get into it. Yeah. For better or worse. It all just struck me as kind of a noodly, you know? I do personally think that Christopher Young's orchestral soundtrack for Hellraiser was better, at least from listening to a little bit of Coils. It just, I mean, it's so epic, right? It really raised the film from a low-budget horror film into it's a movie, right? I mean, the film was only made for $1 million, but that soundtrack, I think, really helped. It went on to gross much more than that, even though Roger Ebert hated it. So it's a filthy horror story dressed up in beautifully written words. There's that pain-pleasure balance again, right? The contrasts. And Barker really delivers. I mean, he doesn't take up much of your time. I've not read anything quite like it that succeeds on the level that it does. There's a reason it's so popular. Pulling all these different elements together. Drug use, sadomasochism, this odd love story of passion and death and life and resurrection and betrayal and all of these things. Pulling all these different elements together, cobbling them all together, haha, pins, nails, pinhead, and pulling it off. Highly recommended for an unusual horror read. It's a lot of bang for your buck. Better than food. Check it out. Coffee time. For those of you who are new, thanks so much for watching. I take all of the names of the patrons on Patreon who have donated $5 or more per video to the show. I place your name in this mason jar, and for every review, I pull out a name, and whoever's name I pull out is sent a hard copy of the book I'm reviewing, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly. And the coffee is absolutely delicious. It's currently from Nicaragua. Just got a giant 50-pound bag of it over there. Can't wait. If you would like to get in on that and help support the show, I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you very much. Every little bit helps. You can go to patreon.com/books are better than food or click on the link below and donate $5 or more per video to the show. Thanks a bunch. For $1 or more, you'll get access to all the cool stuff listed below. Please check it out. Thanks a bunch. Also, international shipping is included. Cool. Thank you very much to all my patrons, and best of luck. Okay, here we go. Steven C. Thanks a bunch, Steven. Really appreciate it. You're going to receive Clive Barker's The Hellbound Heart, plus a bag of coffee from Nicaragua, roasted by yours truly. And I hope you love both as much as me. Cheers. Please subscribe if you have not already, and hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this, and always remember, die reading. All right, take care of yourselves. Have a great night. Talk to you soon. Ciao.